Okay, so thank you very much, Andrew. So again, we are here on the Indigenous Global Unity Summit, IGU Summit Week 71, where today it is the International Day for Disaster Risk Reduction. And so we are moving forward. I will be doing the presentation myself today. And let me just maximize the screen so I can see everybody. So I do begin every one of these events, of course, by acknowledging those who came before us on this land. I say a land acknowledgement. So we begin today by acknowledging that we walk upon the traditional territories of Indigenous peoples, and we recognize their history, spirituality, culture, and stewardship of the land. We're grateful to all Indigenous groups for their commitment to protect the land and its resources, and we are committed to reconciliation, partnership, and enhanced understanding. We acknowledge the land we are meeting on here in the Greater Toronto Area is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Wendat, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Anishinaabe peoples, and is now home to many diverse peoples. We also like to acknowledge the land we're on here is at the meeting place of two treaties, the lands of the Mississaugas of the Credit and those of the First Nations of the Williams Treaty. We thank them and other Indigenous peoples for sharing this land with us. We also acknowledge and recognize all of the world's Indigenous peoples as stewards of Mother Earth. So today, as I said, we are going forward. This is week 71 of our Indigenous Global Unity Summit. Today is the International Day for Disaster Risk Reduction, October 13th, 2022. Again, I will be putting various information into the chat as well. I just put in there some information about the International Day for Disaster Risk Reduction. What I do like to say as well is Sawubona, which means I see you, I see myself in you, I see your hopes, your dreams, your struggles, I see your ancestors as well. Because interconnectedness does not end with two people who are greeting each other. It extends to include the ancestors. All beings and Mother Nature are interconnected. There is no sense of being separate. I see myself in all beings, and therefore, if I harm other beings or Mother Nature, it translates into harming myself. So I will, right now as well, share my presentation as well. I do like to, at the beginning of these sessions, mention some of the events that are coming up. Again, tomorrow morning, Friday, October 14th at 10 o'clock in the morning here in Toronto, we'll also have a presentation by Patrick Chun from the IITTI about delivering the World Civility Index to people of the world in a way that leaves no one behind. Again, I'm putting some information into the chat. I don't have the opportunity to put all of these information on the screen every morning. The very next day is the International Day of Rural Women on Saturday, October 15th. And again, the International Day of Rural Women is under the theme Rural Women Cultivating for All this year. So that's recognizing the work of heroines in the food systems of the world, claiming rural areas with opportunities for all. Achieving gender equality and empowering women is not only the right thing to do, but is a critical ingredient in the fight against extreme poverty, hunger, and malnutrition. So again, October 15th, with the theme Rural Women Cultivating Good Food for All, highlighting the essential role that rural women and girls play in the food systems of the world. This will be followed by a final presentation on Sunday, October 16th, by Dr. Amadou Monday Amadou from Yeli International in Nigeria, who will be presenting to us about his CAPH or CAF awards and ceremonies done with UnityNet Nigeria. Sunday, October 16th is also World Food Day. The date is intended to launch the UnityNet yearly hybrid regenerative climate smart food conference awareness events as well. And again, I'm putting into the chat some information about World Food Day, October 16th, an international day celebrated every year worldwide on the 16th of October to commemorate the date of the founding of the UN Food and Agriculture Organization in 1945. The day is celebrated widely by many other organizations concerned with hunger and food security, including the World Food Program. This year's theme is Leave No One Behind, a call for resilient and equitable food systems, where 2022 finds us with an ongoing pandemic, a conflict, a climate that won't stop warming, rising prices, and international tensions. This is affecting global food security. And then I would like as well to show the next screen, which is the main theme of our event today. This is quite different than our normal IGU Summit. Instead of our normal presentation during the IGU Summit, our feature event of this 71st week of the IGU Summit takes place during Climate Smart Global Youth Summit Week, also known as Youth Peace Week. Youth Peace Week started on Global Cooperation Day, Tuesday, October 14th, or October 4th, continues until Sunday, October 16th, which is World Food Day. Although it's nearly 2 weeks long, the name is being used to describe the Global Climate Smart Youth Forum Weeks. Today's event includes a presentation about the Science for Peace Climate Smart Food Program and includes an introduction to biochar as well. This will be followed by a period of questions and answers about biochar and the Climate Smart Food Program that was originally developed by the members of the Science for Peace Community Sustainability Working Group, aka COSWAG, as we call it. Give me a second here. So my name is Lloyd Halfordy, Chief Ecosystem Director of Energy University in Canada, a co-founder of UnityNet International. I will be introducing everyone to the Science for Peace Climate Smart Food Program. However, during the first half of the presentation, I'll be providing you with some information and an introduction to biochar. I'll give you an outline of the Science for Peace Climate Smart Food Program that the Science for Peace COSWAG has been developing in collaboration with a number of partners over the past few years. I'm also the co-founder and administrator of the We Energize Global Cooperation Turtle Island International Civil Society organization that is seeking to undertake life value peace education in the context of life learning gardens. Again, I will put my contact information into the chat so anybody new on the call can contact me directly, as well as the link to the Global Cooperation Turtle Island organization. I want to first introduce you to the 4 organizations that I had been involved with for many years. It started in late 2008 with the creation of the Canadian Biochar Initiative, which tried to create an industry association focused on the pyrolysis companies and the products or co-products, specifically biochar. At that time, the biochar industry was in its infancy. There was no market for biochar at all. The CBI consisted of 3 regional organizations, Biochar Ontario, Biochar Quebec, and the Alberta Biochar Initiative, and had meetings from early 2009 until mid-2012. There were also attempts to create regional initiatives in Atlantic Canada and in British Columbia. In Ontario, we had a nonprofit, Biochar Ontario, with a board of directors, but the Climate Smart Food Program is being delivered through another nonprofit organization, the Science for Peace Community Sustainability Working Group, COSWAG. The Canadian Biochar Initiative organization no longer exists, although there are discussions about possibly resurrecting the organization under another name as the Canadian Renewable Carbon Network, or CRCN. My business, Biochar Consulting, is closely affiliated with an online sustainability education group called Energy University, which I mentioned earlier, which is, along with Science for Peace, supporting the development of the Climate Smart Food Program, which is starting to gain recognition among various entities and communities around the world, including by the members of our global community network, which we'll mention again later. So This part of the presentation is intended to first introduce people to the concept of biochar, outline one of the projects that we're doing in collaboration with the members of Science for Peace Community Sustainability Working Group, our Climate Smart Food Program. So Biochar Ontario was part of this initiative, attempting for many years to create a biochar industry. In Ontario, in Canada, I did help start the Canadian Biochar Initiative many years ago, again, 2008. I was the president of the local chapter of the CBI, or Biochar Ontario. And although our group was focused primarily on educating people about biochar in Ontario, we also had been exchanging information and ideas with a number of other national and international partners. Biochar, I want to mention, is both an ancient and a modern concept. It's actually a fairly simple idea. What biochar really comes down to is utilizing charcoal in agriculture and soils. So biochar is an idea whose knowledge has been around for thousands of years, yet an idea that's been mostly lost until recently. It's now only being rediscovered. As everyone probably knows, the so-called Green Revolution formed the basis of the existing modern agricultural technological management practices that we use today in much of the world. The Green Revolution came to the forefront because it's based on this industrialization of agriculture and was able to produce amazing abundance in a quite mechanistic way, however. The Green Revolution worked because it forced nature to abide by the rules that we were imposing. It force-fed a diet of water and mostly mined and petrochemical-derived chemicals, fertilizers, and pesticides, while extracting the maximum amount out of the natural systems as possible, usually in a quite unsustainable way, and especially to the detriment of other species, biodiversity, including in our soils. So the Green Revolution was never about leveraging nature to improve efficiency of production. It was about using brute force with its hugely energy and material intensive inputs, mostly of water and agrochemicals, to beat nature into submission, gain dominance over it, while at the same time weakening nature's resilience. However, biochar is a technology that attempts to work with nature as much as possible, leverage nature's best qualities, produce what we call sustainable abundance. In a world of increasingly scarce and expensive resources, it is a concept that's being revived in order to help ensure soil and environmental sustainability, and thus ensure that our biological resources can be sustainably harvested over the long term, even if those other inputs are reduced or become scarce or become significantly more expensive. As noted, biochar is a term used for the stuff we normally call charcoal. Everyone probably knows what charcoal is. You burn it in your barbecue, but not barbecue or not biochar. In technical terms, char is the product of biomass that's been heated in the absence of oxygen to temperatures of about 400 or 500 degrees Celsius or more to drive off the volatile components. If you take any biomass and heat it up without oxygen to quite high temperatures, at least 400 degrees Celsius or more, it will turn to char eventually. The process is called pyrolysis. Biochar is simply char that's intended for use in soils. But we call it biochar when it has the right properties and also goes into soils rather than using the term charcoal for soils. Whereas charcoal is the word we use for the fuel. But we have to ask also, why put biochar or char into soils? Because it's actually mostly pure carbon. And biochar is neither a nutrient nor is it a fertilizer. And although carbon in the soil is generally considered good, just throwing any kind of charcoal into the soil won't usually give us agricultural soil benefits. However, biochar that's made the right way, meaning the properties and post-processing and the co-amendments that are integrated into it, can be beneficial to soils and the plants that grow in them. So yes, sometimes charcoal is good for cooking, but if we do it right, the charcoal can be good for the soil. And when good charcoal goes into soil, this is what we call biochar. Why we make biochar, we need to ask what happens when we make it. It's the only technology that can do three things at once. First, the process produces useful energy. It's an exothermic reaction. Putting it to soils can potentially help to improve growing conditions, help our soils in many other ways. But just as importantly, putting into soils sequesters carbon, helps mitigate climate change. I explained this process, byproduct of pyrolysis, the three things: biogas, biooils, biochar. Well-engineered biomass pyrolysis processes capture and release a significant amount of energy from that process in the form of heat, possibly in the forms of liquids and gases. Usually the process of biomass pyrolysis is self-sustaining, net energy positive, or exothermic, so the process of making biochar itself is considered an alternative energy. But of course, this energy is not the only concern we have. We also have to concern ourselves with producing enough food in the context of a changing climate. And this is what makes biochar so special. It is an important primarily because it is the only technology that does those three things. The process produces useful energy. It helps soils in many ways by improving the properties, making them more fertile, or at least helping to maintain fertility, helping to improve food production. Perhaps most importantly, of course, sequestering carbon, helping to mitigate or even reverse climate change by permanently storing the carbon in the earth, in the soils. So many of us consider in the biochar initiative that placing biochar into the soils is akin to reverse carbon mining. In other words, putting the carbon we dug up out of the ground as fossil fuels, oil, gas, coal, which we generally burned, back into the ground. So you're probably asking yourself, how exactly can biochar mitigate climate change? It's considered climate mitigation tool because biochar can address this change indirectly, because when plants grow, they use this process called photosynthesis, which means converting carbon dioxide in the air together with water in the soils or in the air into oxygen and carbohydrates. The process is one of the fundamental building blocks of life. But biochar works with the global carbon cycle. Shown here is a simple depiction of the global carbon cycle. What does biochar have to do with that? All of the carbon that's taken in by plants eventually is returned to the atmosphere as carbon dioxide or methane when the plants decompose. Once a plant is dead, the biomass, this decay process happens in a matter of weeks, months, or a few short years. When we change the carbon that's embedded in the cells of plants into biochar, place the char into soils, instead of leaving it to decompose, we're effectively storing that carbon as a solid. This solid carbon or biochar doesn't degrade or turn back into CO2 very quickly. It can actually last hundreds or even thousands of years in soils, with the half-life usually in the hundreds of thousands of years. For every kilogram of biochar placed into soil, this means essentially we're locking away more than 3 kilograms of CO2, which never makes it back into the atmosphere, at least not in our lifetimes or the lifetimes of our children or grandchildren. So biochar will effectively remove that CO2 from the global carbon cycle. So effectively, the CO2 that is taken up by the plants, converted to organic carbon molecules like cellulose and lignin, is then fixed in the charcoal when it's turned into biochar. The carbon is effectively stored when the biochar is placed into the soils. The storage is, for all intents, permanent. Thus, we can say that biochar is the only carbon negative energy. The more biochar you produce, the less CO2 will be left in the atmosphere at the end of the day, provided, of course, that you grow more biomass, more crops, more plants, and more forests. So coming up fairly soon is a diagram produced by the International Biochar Initiative, this one. This diagram shows a simplified carbon cycle produced by the founder of the IBI. It shows that when we create biochar from plant materials, we're interrupting the carbon cycle. This makes more sense than trying to just store the carbon in plants and trees, because the plants and trees that we do grow will eventually die, decompose back into CO2 as part of this natural carbon cycle. So we need a slightly different approach if we want to remove the excess carbon that we have put into the atmosphere from our excessive burning of fossil fuels. The solution is converting the CO2 carbon into useful solid carbon, which can be done by converting a portion of our biomass resources that we will grow anyway, the residues with waste from our food crops and forestry, into biochar, and place the char back into the soils so we can grow more foods, crops, and forests. And since the biochar carbon will stay in the soil, never return to the atmosphere, at least not in our lifetimes or our children or grandchildren, we now have a way of righting the carbon imbalance that is causing climate change. Of course, to do this properly, we do need to still grow at least an equal volume of biomass back for every ton that we remove and turn into energy and biochar if it's to have a real effect on the climate. So the best option is to use the biochar we produce to help the plants, the trees, grow as quickly as possible. Luckily for us, this is actually what biochar can be made to do. One other thing that I should point out is this: the capacity of the soil to store carbon is huge. Soils actually contain more carbon than all the terrestrial vegetation in the atmosphere combined. And because biochar is so stable, is expected to stay in the soil for hundreds or even thousands of years, and biochar has very good long-term stability in the cold soils of countries like Canada, because there's such a huge country, huge carbon sequestration potential for biochar in Canada. So biochar could probably lower our net CO2 emissions dramatically, bring us to net zero. There are decades of CO2 sequestration in the soils of Canada. Of course, Canada is huge, Africa is even bigger. Canada is a little under 10 million square kilometers, Africa is about 30 million square kilometers, just under twice the size of Russia, bigger than Canada, the United States and China put together, or about 20% of the land in the world. So the potential for sequestering carbon into the soils of Africa is also enormous as well. The benefits of biochar in degraded and tropical soils has been shown to be far greater as well. Of course, biochar does more for the atmosphere than just carbon sequestration. We have to maximize the other benefits to the climate from biochar. Several studies shown to reduce methane emissions, especially in anaerobic soils or wet soils. Other studies, emissions of nitrous oxide from soils, which is a major greenhouse gas. But most importantly, good quality biochar deliberately placed into soils as a soil amendment has these benefits to plants and crops. It will stay in the soil, will help the atmosphere, the climate, by keeping carbon from returning to the atmosphere. And since it is so permanent, we may need to only apply it once or a few times over a few years. But there are the benefits that have been found equally as important. These include the fact that it can help retain soil nutrients, keep them in place longer, help prevent contamination of our freshwater resources. Agricultural runoff is actually one of the main sources of water pollution around the world. This might mean over time, less fertilizers are needed to be applied to crops, which could translate to less cost to farmers, hopefully translating to less cost for everyone. The process of making biochar is also scalable, should be good for both large and small farmers around the world, may be able to affordably apply biochar to their fields. They won't necessarily need multi-million-dollar equipment to make it. This is especially good for small-scale farmers, even gardeners, who could, for instance, buy one system as part of a cooperative, share it between them so that every one of them can affordably apply biochar to their fields and gardens. Thus, we might conclude that converting our residual biomass resources from farms and forests into biochar makes sense for the climate, makes sense for farmers, gardeners. It produces energy, can displace fossil fuels as an energy source, helps soils in other ways, such as holding water and nutrients in the soil, preventing other greenhouse gases from escaping. Also fairly easy to do. Charcoal making actually one of the oldest technologies known to man. Of course, modern technologies for making biochar are much different than the ancient way of making charcoal. They're actually cleaner than most biomass combustion technologies and can be made at a small scale, right on farms and close to cities. So Biochar Ontario once had a small project on the roof of the Carrick Common in Toronto. The focus of the project was facilitating the growing of food on green roofs. The owner of Carrick Common was our partner of the project. He had plans to design a community space and a section of the roof that would eventually integrate a small Japanese tea garden. This was to commemorate the victims of the Fukushima disaster in Japan. Unfortunately, that roof project was never realized because of some structural problems on the roof, leaks which prevented us from moving forward. but it meant to show that biochar can also be used on a smaller scale in cities and gardens, anywhere that soils are used to grow plants, which could also include indoor and home plantings. But in summary, I wanted to say converting our biochar or converting our residual biomass resources from farms and forests into biochar will likely make sense for the environment because it produces energy, can displace fossil fuels as an energy source, helps soils in many ways by trapping nutrients, holding water in the soil, preventing greenhouse gases from escaping. It's very easy to do. Making charcoal is one of the oldest technologies known to man. But modern technologies for making it is much different than the old ways of making charcoal. The modern technologies, even cleaner than most biomass combustion technologies, can be made at a small scale, right on farms, close to cities. Of course, we can utilize these biochar technologies in synergy with other technologies like biodigesters to leverage the amazing power of biology to help restore the world, hopefully make right some of the insults of the past, also those that we continue to inflict on ourselves in nature. But we need people like you, the people who are watching this, to understand the power of plants and photosynthesis to create a better future for all of humanity. A bit of background of who is the Canadian Biochar Initiative, or who was. We were originally conceived in November 2008. We had our first meeting in December 2008, and Biochar Ontario was incorporated in June 2009. Biochar Ontario was a nonprofit environmental industry association who aspired to be the lead promoter and facilitator of all aspects of research, application, and dissemination of information related to biochar in Ontario. Our mission was to promote biochar as a vehicle to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, improve soil fertility, enhance food security by advocating for research, development, and commercialization of biochar and its related technologies. Finally, I wanted to mention a gentleman by the name of Frank Nixon, a farmer who's located in British Columbia on the west coast of Canada. Frank actually recruited his wife, Valerie, to take a video of him making biochar on his farm using a technique that's becoming quite popular in North America and Europe, but has its roots in Japan, where the technique was first discovered. This Kontiki method gives farmers the ability to produce larger amounts of quality biochar on their own farm or property in a reasonably safe way, such that they do not have to buy it from other producers. While the device is not considered to be high-tech, it can still be considered to be a clean technology for the production of biochar by the users of biochar, using green wastes that can often be found on or nearby to farms in rural communities around the world, and especially where there are abundant forestry and woody biomass wastes available to convert into biochar. Here in Ontario, I knew of 2 or 3 farmers who were already using such a device, including the Whole Village Farm in Caledon, which began pioneering this technique and had plans to set up a community biochar education center on that property. This ends the biochar part of the presentation. I'll not continue this presentation, or I'll continue this presentation by talking about our Climate Smart Food program at this point in time. So now that we know that building soil carbon is essential to maintain soil health, improve the factors related to soil water, nutrition, retention, and structure, this is why the Community Sustainability Working Group of Science for Peace developed this program and protocol for the recognition of climate smart soils, which is the recognition and certification of soil-based carbon increases over time. In order for the food product, any food product to become certified under the CSF program, it must meet 2 essential criteria. The first being the farm and food producer increasing the total soil carbon as a result of their operations, and the second being the land manager signing a declaration supporting the implementation of the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, or the SDGs, the global goals. So there are 17 ambitious goals for all of humanity that the UN would like to achieve by 2030 in the next 7 years or so. The Climate Smart Food Certification Program would tackle primarily Goal 2, Zero Hunger, and Goal 13, Climate Action. But any company, organization, government, farmer, or landowners who would participate in the Climate Smart Food Program would need to sign a declaration that they would make every effort to support the implementation of all of the goals, but at a minimum would make an attempt to support the achievement of at least one additional goal besides SDG 2 and 13 within the context of their own operations. So by signing up for the Climate Smart Food Program, they would also promise to achieve and support the other goals like good quality or good health and well-being, quality education, gender equality, clean water and sanitation, sustainable life on land, including protecting and enhancing biodiversity, and of course, creating and implementing partnerships for the goal. The term climate smart also comes from the UN Food and Agriculture Organization. The CSA, or Climate Smart Agriculture, is an approach to developing the technical policy and investment conditions to achieve sustainable agricultural development for food security under climate change, and is designed to identify and operationalize sustainable agricultural development within the parameters of climate change. Achieving this transformation requires, for CSA, requires an integrated approach responsive to specific local conditions. The Climate Smart Food Certification Program is intended to promote CSA, but is focused on regenerative solutions that actively sequester carbon into agro-ecosystems, including gardens. Adoption of the CSF program should be able to help farmers, gardeners, and landowners in several other areas of concern, including productivity, adaptation, and income, especially in the case where there is food that is being sold locally to others in the community or regionally. The CSF program is also supporting the Zero Hunger Challenge, which was an essential program that was developed by the Secretary General of the UN a few years ago, intended to support the achievement of Goal 2, Zero Hunger. The CSF program began by supporting the ambitions of the ZHC. Among other things, those who commit to the ZHC must declare that they will continue to actively work to end hunger, eliminate all forms of malnutrition, build inclusive and sustainable food systems, encourage others to join in their own activities to take the challenge, commit to partnerships with nourishing people, nourishing the planet, growing prosperity, and harvesting peace, as well as holding themselves accountable to deliver on their own promises. Soils are integral to the function of all terrestrial ecosystems and to global food and fiber production. An often overlooked aspect of soils is their potential to sequester carbon. This graphic is from a paper that was published in the journal Nature in April 2016 that highlighted the state-of-the-art in soils greenhouse gas research. One should note that the bottom under practices, the paper highlighted 8 different soil management practices that could be applied by farmers and land managers to achieve the desired results of increasing soil carbon. Biochar, a field practice that I know very well, that was explained at the start of the presentation, is listed as one such option. Under the Program for Climate Smart Food, a certification program related to protocols is applied by farmers, land managers, growers, resulting in the issuance of a certificate of compliance for whatever they produce on their farm or in their garden, applied throughout the supply chain all the way to the consumers that purchase the certified climate smart products. This is similar to the way that organic certification works, but should be cheaper and easier to do since there's also only 2 criteria to achieve the certification. One is just a promise to pledge to implement the Sustainable Development Goals, global goals. And the first criteria for certification is a verified increase in the total soil carbon in the soils where that food, feed, fiber, fodder, or biofuel is produced. So the total soil carbon can easily be measured using a standardized soil carbon test, which is relatively inexpensive, quick to do. The protocols ensure that the soil samples are used for the soil carbon tests are randomized samples. Certificates of compliance for the climate smart farm or even a garden could be provided to the land manager if the soil carbon has increased relative to the previous year. So the total relative percentage increase in soil is not a criteria for certification. However, as indicated earlier, land managers will need to sign a declaration that clearly states that in order to get the climate smart food certification, they must support, uphold, and attempt to implement programs and policies that will help them and their employees, suppliers, and customers achieve the objectives of the 17 SDGs, those Sustainable Development Goals. The declaration will need to be witnessed and countersigned by the relevant authority that is overseeing the climate smart certification program in the region where the land resides. A copy of the declaration of the landowner kept and posted on the website of the relevant authority overseeing the Climate Smart certification program in the region where the land resides will also need to be prominently displayed on the premises of the landowner. A link to the relevant online document will need to be included with all relevant traceability information whenever a sale or shipment of certified Climate Smart food is made by the farmer, landowner, or his or her assigns for their employees or consultants. The landowner also needs to provide a report on a yearly basis outlining what they've actually done to support the implementation and achievement of any one or more of the SDGs, and the report will be published online for anyone to review. This, along with some important marketing repercussions that I'll go into a little later. When it comes to the various forms farm and garden products, in order to realize the potential for achieving a new food sector via the CSF certification and branding program, a plethora of new carbon-based products will need to be developed, tested, and deployed into the marketplace. And biochar will very likely play a central role in the natural as a feedstock of choice for the development of these types of carbon-based products, since the addition of biochar to soils and to a range of soil amendments that farmers and land managers, including gardeners, use will eventually guarantee that measurable increases in soil carbon will be achieved, nearly guaranteeing that the users of these natural carbon-based and carbon-enriched fertility products will be able to consistently obtain the Climate Smart Food certification year over year. In order to ensure a net increase in soil carbon, farmers, gardeners, and other land managers could choose to apply any practices available to them in order to achieve the desired outcome. There are a variety of techniques that can be utilized to ensure that their soil carbon will increase year over year. Carbon-based fertilizers and formulations, which may include biochar and PK fertilizers, may be utilized along with various other practices known to increase soil carbon. Increases in total soil carbon must be verified by an approved third-party lab capable of running the appropriate soil tests, which then submitted to the certification body for verification. All land resources that are certified in any given year will be registered by the certification authority and mapped using GIS tools. This data will be open source, independently searchable, verifiable by any third-party organization or consumer. So all feed, food, fodder, fiber, or biofuel products produced in the certified land can then be labeled with the certified CSF logo and symbols and other branding intended to be traceable back to the original production acreage. So besides this standardized soil carbon test, land managers would also need to file a report once a year that describes what it is that they have done or are doing on their farm or in their garden, or as part of their farm or garden business or production operations that supports the implementation of the SDGs. In order to maintain their certification every year and for recertification, along with the yearly soil test, this report would need to be submitted to the CSF certification body by the certified land manager. This report would be uploaded to the CSF Certification Authority website, along with the audio, photos, videos, or other media, as well as a map that clearly shows the boundaries of land that's certified, along with copies of the original soil carbon test reports and other third-party verification reports. All this information can be used by the farmer and land manager to market his or her farm, garden, or business in whatever way that they wish. Thus, marketing can be as simple or ambitious as they wish, but must somehow relate to and describe what it is that they are doing on their farm, in their garden, or in their production operation to support and achieve one or more of the sustainable development goals. We actually hope to see land managers begin to compete about who can do the best job of integrating and implementing the sustainable development goals within their own operations by implementing multiple actions to achieve the SDGs within their own business or community. But it is up to each farmer, gardener, and food producer, and each group of collaborating or cooperating land managers and farmers to choose what they are most passionate about, seek to implement those goals that are achievable within the context of their own farm, garden, or production operations. The outcome of the CSF program that COSWAP developed included the creation of protocols that allows for certification of climate smart food. We also began developing a set of identifiable CSF logos and symbols of branding, together with a marketing campaign that we hope will eventually allow consumers to recognize the CSF symbology, also understand the CSF conventional means. The end result will be a certification scheme that can be applied to all foods that have been grown using the regenerative climate smart methods. The CSF certification can be applied either independently or in conjunction with various other food certification schemes like organic or kosher or fair trade or non-GMO or naturally grown or anything else. We'd like to see an outcome would be where food markets have a special climate smart section. Just like supermarkets today in most modern countries have organic food sections, we also expect that most of the food being sold in climate smart food section will be less expensive than organic food and of comparable price to conventionally grown food. The cheaper food prices would arise as a result of farmers being paid under various CSR and carbon market programs for the carbon they sequester into their soil. We believe that if climate smart food is even a few cents cheaper than conventional food, consumers will quickly pick up on this trend, and the climate smart food section will become the default choice for consumers. The choice of purchasing climate smart food will then become not just an ethical or a lifestyle choice, but will become a pocketbook issue. And that is what will truly drive the changes that we need at the scales that are necessary to tackle the big issues like climate change and sustainable development. But this food system supply chain certification does not stop at just fresh foods. The CSF program can also be used to certify prepared and packaged foods, or at least the individual ingredients that go into these foods. So it's likely that various levels of certification will be created, will help the consumer identify the relative content or percentage of CSF certified ingredients that have been used in any particular product, such as a blue label as depicted for lower levels, along with a bronze, silver, gold, or perhaps even a platinum level for other suppliers who wish to go that extra mile. The certification levels will be informed by both the science and the economics of carbon sequestration of the soils in terms of what is practically achievable under most circumstances and in the different countries and communities. The CSF certification does not stop at fresh or packaged food either. It can also be applied to establishments that prepare and serve food to consumers and customers, including restaurants, whether it might be the entire restaurant being certified or select climate smart food choices on a menu. Establishments include not only restaurants, but also prepared food ingredients within the food service industry, whether for cafeterias or fast food chains or catering services or airports or anything in between. Also, along with food production supply chains, the CSF logo can be licensed to various farms and growing system product suppliers, provided their service products have been shown to be to guarantee that the farmer, gardener, grower, or land manager uses them, will be able to increase their soil carbon levels and get the CSF certification. When integrated into fertilizers, these products are commonly referred as NPKC fertilizers or carbon-based fertility products. In addition to biochar, these products will very likely be the easiest way for the product manufacturer to guarantee this. I'm putting into the chat a link to our biochar soil fertilizer NPKC group on LinkedIn, which is a professional network. But because carbon markets care about the CO2 emissions from transportation, if CSF certified farmers, producers, and land managers wish to obtain things like carbon credits through those markets, the CSF program should be able to support action toward relocalization of food in any jurisdiction. So the CSF program thus also supports various scales of relocalization or regionalization of food production and distribution, including local food concepts like extra local, ultra local, and hyper local food, and any other similar variants as well. We had at first expected that certified climate smart farmers, gardeners, growers, and land managers will eventually be able to tap into the various local or regional carbon finance programs like Ontario's cap and trade program and get paid soil carbon credits for the carbon that they sequestered into their soils. Back when we first developed these protocols for climate smart food, it was in 2016. At that time, the average Ontario farm was about 260 acres, or about 105 hectares. Given that each ton of carbon sequestered into soils is equivalent to about 3.7 tons of CO2, if a typical farmer or land manager was able to sequester an average of 1 ton of carbon per hectare per year, at a CO2 price of only $30 a ton, that average farmer with 260 acres would have potentially been able to gain more than $10,000 for that carbon, which is not huge by any means, but could potentially offset any increased costs that they may have incurred as a result of changing their agricultural practices. The CSF Consulting Group was at the time advocating for differential CO2 pricing for the payments that farmers and other landowners could receive in the form of carbon payments. But of course, that was for nothing, since the regulated carbon market in Ontario is gone, regulated to the dustbin by the current Conservative Ontario government. We are hopeful that either the federal government or more likely voluntary markets created by corporations and other large emitters will eventually work with us and support such a system and help us develop a system of carbon payments for any biochar that's sequestered into soils, or in fact, any other types of infrastructure. We now call this system of payments as PAGI, or Payments for Global Goals Implementation, where currently the global goals are, of course, the Sustainable Development Goals. In summary, the CSF Working Group and Consulting Group originally developed programs intended to leverage our local food production systems, including local gardens, in such a way that we'll eventually be able to tackle major existential threats like climate change, one farm at a time, one garden at a time, and one meal at a time. So this slide shows our initial social media and marketing for the Climate Smart Food Program and concept. We expected that the CSF program will eventually become a potentially quite lucrative global marketing scheme for the achievement of a significant slice of future sustainable development dollars, which could begin to flow as a result of the supply chain management that will be needed to make it work via certification and traceability protocols and branding, etc. I'd also like to emphasize how important this program could also be in terms of creating consumer awareness of the sort of simple solutions that exist for tackling real-world issues such as climate change and sustainable development. Of course, with the development of the protocols, the CSF Consulting Group had also started working to develop a beyond branding framework, which means that we would put into place all the various infrastructure that would be necessary to track all of the food, feed, fiber, fodder, and biofuel that's produced on the land, and that has been certified so that everything that is produced on these lands will be recognized throughout the supply chain, all the way to the final consumers of products. In much the same way that organic farm certification has resulted in supply chain traceability programs and infrastructure being implemented across a broad sector of the food economy. The Beyond Branding framework essentially describes the back end that will be needed that will support the individual farmers and land managers with the essential task of getting their own message out to consumers about the actions they're taking to implement the global goals in the context of their own operation. The CSF program allows individual farmers and growers to tell their unique story in whatever way they feel will allow them to get their message out about what they're doing to help their community, and that will allow them to flourish within the context of their own local production operations in a competitive but ever improving, ever more collaborative production environment that encourages co-opetition, results in ever improving standards and levels of personal and collective achievement. So I would like to welcome everyone to the world of biochar and climate smart food. More information can be obtained about our climate smart food program by going to any one of the sources of information on the screen. Please also note that the CSF program is an initiative of the Science for Peace Community Sustainability Working Group and the CSF Consulting Group, working with and supported by Energy University and the CSF Development Group, which was in turn being supported by Biochar Ontario, the original Canadian Biochar Initiative, and various other organizations. So thank you very much for listening. I would be happy to take any questions. Again, I'm putting some links into the chat to the various, especially LinkedIn groups that are related to these original programs we created. But before I finish out today, I also wanted to mention the Global Unity Network that we are establishing. UnityNet is a network that includes platforms for delivering education, training, awareness raising, and open idea and cultural exchange programs managed by UnityNet International. The humanitarian entrepreneurship learning programs that we're supporting are very much focused on engaging youth, educators, and decision makers in these learning programs and community engagement processes, but with a strong emphasis on women and girls as leaders in their communities and also of their own homes and families as per SDG 5, gender equality. The goal of our business and the network is to eventually establish a new 21st century economy of compassion and cooperation, and the recognition of life value as being fundamentally more important than money value, where money is just a fictional construct created by humans that helps us to make decisions about the most economic pathway to achieving certain outcomes, which are based on the goals that we individually and collectively set for ourselves as human beings. The hybrid learning network that we're creating consists of a virtual collaborative network for interchange for peace, networked through social media. Will be implemented alongside a network of internet-enabled, locally established community Unity Garden learning centers, which are in turn supported by a Unity learning network of educators who understand the importance of delivering programs of life value, peace education in each of our own local communities. Again, I'm putting in the primary social media networks into the chat.
Okay, Lloyd, so, if it's okay with you, I'm going to stop recording this so we can capture it. And then Jenny Carrington has a next meeting, so I think she has a comment before she leaves.
Okay, excellent.
All right, give me just 1 second here. I'm going to share.
I just wanted to say on this last slide, this is actually from the beginning. You will see our main logo of UnityNet International, creating the global Unity network, also UnityNet, which is an international empowerment network for all of our members to use as a way to uplift the members of our network, ensure that no one is left behind. I'd like to encourage everyone to please also join subsequent upcoming IGU Summit events, which take place every Thursday until the end of next year, 2023, in alignment with the UN Global Compact or UNGC plans and strategy. Again, I will put in additional information about the IGU Summit that we are having every Thursday. And I like to put in as well some additional information about the UN Global Compact strategy, which I believe every person on this call should likely know about, because these are very important things that the UNGC is doing, including their various goals, which we should be aware of. So this brings us full circle back to the opening slide of the presentation. I'm going to be putting some additional links for people attending the Zoom session to join the various professional biochar networking groups that were created prior to the UnityNet coming into being. This includes the Biochar Offsets Group, the Biochar Soil and Fertilizer NPK Seed Group, which I posted earlier, Biochar Food, Biochar Standards and Regulations, Biochar South Central Asia, Biochar Japan, Biochar China. There were a number of groups that were created, as you can tell by the countries that were focused on at that time. We had a strong focus on Asia at that time, but if someone on this call might be interested in doing so, we could also establish a Climate Smart Africa professional network or an African carbon farming initiative, as well as an African renewable carbon network, in order to promote and assemble the climate smart practitioners who will be producing the climate smart food in Africa. This would complement as well the existing UnityNet Africa and Diaspora Professionals Network, as well as the Canadian Carbon Farming Initiative, the Canadian Renewable Carbon Network, the Climate Smart Food Consulting Group, the C4 Group, Climate Smart Community Construction Collaborative, and the network of Climate Smart Learning Centers, the Climate Smart Infrastructure Network, the Climate Smart Urban Farming Network, the Energon New Green Trades Alliance, the Urban Farming Digital Hub Network, the Future Farming Group, which are all members, of course, of the Global Partnership for Regenerative Development that we are now promoting, of course, through UnityNet as we move forward and develop this new paradigm of production. So this, again, ends the presentation about the CSF program, which, of course, an introduction about biochar. So, Jenny, did you wish to say a few words?